Hello, dear listener. Please subscribe to our channel. Enjoy watching. About 9 years ago, there was an event that significantly impacted my future life, and not just mine. During that time, my brother and I were living in a small town in the state of Kansas. Both of us worked as laborers in the same organization, often sharing the same shift. I was the older brother and more of a homebody, while Mel instructions enjoyed going to parties and hanging out with friends or girls. At that time, I had a crush on a girl named Becky, who had moved to our town a couple of years ago. She worked as a waitress at a local cafe, and I used to visit there frequently just to catch a glimpse of her. I even fantasized about being a hero who would save her from persistent admirers, and in return she would reward me with her wonderful smile and a kiss. However, our town was quiet and most people knew each other, so they tried not to harm one another. But I had such strong feelings for Becky that one day I finally gathered the courage to approach her, inviting her to go to the movies or simply enjoy some ice cream. Fortunately, she agreed, albeit after some initial reluctance. That same evening, I felt like the luckiest person in the world. We started dating, and soon our romantic involvement turned into a deep love that we both cherished. 2 months later, we decided to celebrate our small anniversary on a small meadow outside of town. We had agreed to meet near her cafe, and I was supposed to pick her up. However, as I was approaching, a siren began to blare throughout the town, warning of an approaching tornado. I stepped on the gas and hurried to pick up Becky, intending to find a safe place with her. People around us began to panic, each trying to save their own lives. Just outside the cafe's entrance, I spotted Becky, seemingly not seeking shelter but looking for me. Among the chaos, I got out of the car, rushed toward her, shouting her name and urging her to come inside. By this time, a strong wind had already started, and the sky was darkened by ominous clouds. In the distance, I could see a dark funnel cloud approaching our location. While I was calling out to her, Becky noticed me and started running towards me. However, a large sign torn loose by the wind fell between us, blocking our path. Someone pushed me, and I fell. By the time I got up, I couldn't see Becky anymore. But I refused to give up and continued forward. Suddenly, my brother appeared out of nowhere, trying to persuade me to go with him to seek shelter. I insisted on finding Becky, and then I saw her in the distance, amidst flying debris. A few seconds later, the dark funnel cloud reached her, and the wind lifted her into the air. I screamed, Becky, excited, but it was already too late. My brother pulled me back, shouting that there was nothing more we could do for her. We found ourselves in the basement of one of the houses, and Mel tried to comfort me, urging me to stay away from the exit and wait out the storm. I stood there in shock, realizing that I had lost the love of my life. At that moment, I didn't want it to go on living. However, my brother eventually brought me back to my senses. I looked at him and realized that I still had a brother to care for, even though he had grown up, and at that moment, he was the one looking out for me. We spent over an hour in the basement listening to the chaos happening above. When everything finally quieted down, one of the men took a risk and peeked outside to check if it was safe. He returned shortly and announced that the disaster was over, and we could come out. Mel and I also emerged. I saw debris all around us and damaged buildings. Further down the street, some houses had lost their roofs, or they were in ruins from objects that had fallen on them. I immediately rushed to the spot where I had last seen Becky, pushing aside small debris to clear a path. I kept calling out her name, hoping she would respond. Mel followed me, helping me search for her. But after a while, I reluctantly accepted the dreadful thought that she hadn't survived. After all, I had seen the wind take her, and I would never forget that moment. My brother looked at me with sympathy, offering words of comfort, but at that moment, I couldn't hear him. I fell to my knees, raised my head, and screamed loudly. I needed to release some of the pain from losing her. But once I had calmed down a bit and come to terms with my devastating loss, Mrs. Mill offered his hand in silence, suggesting we move on. I followed him, but I didn't notice that many others around us had also suffered. Some had lost their homes, others were searching for their loved ones, and some were panicking because their pets were missing. As to kneeping 6 of alopecia, my brother and I headed to our home, although I had little hope it had survived. When we arrived, we saw that a car had fallen onto the left half of the house. Damn, a little breeze blew by. Mel said, "Why did you rescue me?" I could have saved her. I grumbled instead of thanking him for saving me. I went toward the house, or rather its surviving part. We could enter through the door, but we needed to move a fallen beam first. "Oh, you're very welcome," my brother replied with irritation trailing behind. But I wasn't in the mood for politeness. I was tormented by the pain of losing my beloved. At that moment, I just wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air instead of her. Unfortunately, I remained here, and the first thing I did when I got inside the house was grab a bottle of whiskey and take several gulps straight from the neck. "Hey, I believe she'll be found. Maybe she managed to hide." Mel tried to comfort me. "We searched everything, and besides, I started to say, "that there's no body anywhere." I looked at my brother and realized he was right. But I still needed some time to come to terms with it. After having a bit more to drink, we went to check the rest of our house. The damaged part could be repaired, but it would take time. We cleared some debris to open pathways between rooms, but at that moment, another beam fell from the ceiling onto the wall, piercing through it. I could smell gas filling the room, and in the far corner, I noticed a sparking piece of severed wire. I shouted to my brother that we needed to get out, and we barely made it outside before the explosion. People, now half of our house was completely destroyed. "Do you think insurance will cover this?" I asked him, looking at the rising smoke. "I hope so. What do we do now?" He replied, "Who knows? Screw it all. Had enough. Hey, Taven. Everything will work out." Actually, I looked at him, wanting his optimism to rub off on me, but I knew it would take a long time to rebuild everything. "Well, you can take care of the house, and I'll continue searching for Becky." "I can't accept it until I see her," I said. Left her difficultly and my brother at home. I returned to the cafe. The rescuers were finishing up clearing the debris. I approached one of them and asked if he had seen Becky, but he shook his head negatively. And for you, I wanted to go in and search as well, but the uniformed personnel stopped me, saying it still wasn't safe there and that they would let me know if they learned anything about her. However, I couldn't just stand by, so I persuaded them to let me help. They gave me a helmet and allowed me onto the rubble. He dug there for a long time, into the evening, and only when we overturned the last piece of roofing material, the commander announced that the search for possible victims was over and there was anyone else there. I had nothing left to do but accept it. I wanted to go back home, but on my way, I met my brother, who told me it wasn't a good idea to return there yet. He asked his friend to take us in temporarily because his house miraculously survived, and we headed there. A month had passed since that tragedy, and by then we had returned to our rebuilt home. Initially, I didn't stop searching for Becky. Besides filing a missing person report, I posted flyers with her photo everywhere. But on that day, it wasn't just her who had disappeared. 3 more people missing, family and friends looking for them. However, time went by with no results, and I began to reconcile with the idea that she had vanished from my life forever. Realizing this, I didn't want to stay in the town that constantly reminded me of her. Some time later, I moved to another city, got a job there, and started a new life. However, I still couldn't forget the girl who remained in my heart. Occasionally, I visited my brother, making it seem like a regular visit, but secretly hoping for any news about Becky. Nothing changed, and I returned to my new residence empty-handed. Another 6 months passed, and I visited my old home and my brother less frequently, gradually accepting my new life. They say time heals. Well, it doesn't heal, it just makes you forget the pain that was, and new interests help with that. At first, you want to scream at the world, but with time, that scream turns into a whisper, and then it simply fades away. And I, too, began to heal bit by bit. At work, where I found employment, even one of my coworkers started showing interest in me, hinting that she liked me. Lisa was quite attractive, but I still couldn't bring myself to start a new relationship. Although the pain had mostly subsided, I still couldn't. All of my interactions with Lisa ended in us simply having polite conversations at the office, and afterward, I would return home, take out the photo of Becky and me from the drawer, and immerse myself in memories of when we were together. One evening, I went for a walk to get some fresh air, and at the same time, stopped by a store to restock on groceries. As I leisurely strolled along the path, I noticed a girl waiting at a bus stop whose silhouette from a distance reminded me of Becky's figure. I thought that she was starting to haunt my thoughts, and I wanted to walk past without further inspection. However, as I got closer, I realized that her figure bore an uncanny resemblance to the girl I had loved. I don't know why, but I turned and headed toward her. Impulses rather than reason guided me. But when I reached her and touched her shoulder and she turned around, I froze in place. Before me stood Becky, alive and unharmed. For a moment, immediately as in thought I might be hallucinating, but her presence was so real that it couldn't be just an illusion. Becky. She saw me and immediately panicked, trying to run away. However, I didn't want to lose her again and chased after her. Becky, Becky, stop. I kept shouting. I pursued her down the path, not caring what random passers-by might think. But soon, I caught up with her and grabbed her arm. Aki, it's you! Stop. Let go of me. She tried to free her arm. But why? Aki, I've been looking for you for so long. I thought you were dead. You better keep thinking that. Let me go. We shouldn't meet. Why? Let's talk. What happened to you then? You disappeared. No one could find you. She stopped and looked at me bitterly. David, we never should have started dating in the first place. Trust me, we couldn't have been together anyway. But why? I couldn't understand why she was saying this, as back then we were so happy together, and I saw in her eyes that she loved me too. But it seemed that she still had some feelings for me, as I managed to persuade her to talk to me that evening. When I suggested going to a nearby cafe, she refused. Coffee, but Becky requested something stronger. All I had was beer, and she agreed to it. As we walked to my place, Becky kept looking around from time to time, though she didn't explain why or who she was afraid of. It was only when I closed the door to my apartment did she seem to feel somewhat safe. That evening, she told me what had happened to her and why she disappeared from my life. But after hearing her story, it hurt even more than when I lost her. Becky told me that when the tornado approached the cafe that day, she wanted to come to me, not to seek shelter from the storm, but to say goodbye. And that day, her husband had come to see her. Yes, I knew she had been married once, but 2 years before we started dating. Before she came to our town, she had separated from him, and he had gone to another country. Then she received news that he had gone missing in the mountains, and she mentally buried him. But then he reappeared in her life. He filled her with sweet words and asked her to come back to him. Becky confessed that her feelings for him from the past had returned, and since we had just started dating, she decided it would be better to break up with me before things got too serious. When I told her that I had seen the wind carry her away, Becky admitted that she had been lifted briefly, but then fell, and Simon took her into his car and drove her away from the destructive wind. On that day, they both left town, and she didn't even go home, thinking that if she was considered missing, she wouldn't have to find the right words to explain everything to me. Did you never love me at all? I asked, disappointed. I did, and I still do. Yes, I went back to him, thinking our relationship would be like it used to be. But he changed a lot over those 2 years. He became cruel and heartless. To be honest, I wish he would never appear in my life again. Becky told me. She explained that she had run away from him and come to this town, but she still felt like he was chasing her at every turn. I felt sorry for her and offered my help. Affectionately, Becky agreed. I let her stay in my apartment, and she said she still felt the same way about me as before. Since then, our romance resumed and became even stronger. Except, however, I was happy that she was back in my life and resolved to find a way to help her get rid of her husband in the future. For tease, I was delighted about it for nearly a week until one day I accidentally saw her in the park, hugging another man. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I even thought I was looking at someone who just resembled Becky. But as I got closer, there was no doubt. It was her. I called out to her, and she turned around. In her eyes, I saw the same fear as when I first saw her in this town. "David," she asked, bewildered. "What are you doing here? And who is this?" I pointed at the burly man next to her. "I'm her husband." "Who are you?" The man was of imposing stature and glared at me. I felt like the ground was about to give way beneath me and a strong wind was about to engulf me. I didn't know what to say, even though I wanted to tell him that Becky was mine, that she was my girlfriend, and that she loved me. But looking at her and remembering how she had just hugged him, I didn't want to say anything. I just wanted to turn around, leave, and forget that she had ever reappeared in my life. "Fuck both of you," I shouted and turned to leave. I felt like the man was about to attack me from behind and even tensed up, expecting an assault. But nothing happened. I continued walking, and neither of them caught up with me. I returned home, realizing that Becky had once again deceived me, intentionally this time. But I didn't understand why she had done it, why she agreed to move in with me, and why she let our feelings reignite if she had no intention of leaving her husband. I had no answers, and I felt the pain squeezing my chest from the inside as if in a vice. Entering my apartment and seeing the photo on the table that I had placed back in its frame. I grabbed it and hurled it forcefully against the wall. But it brought some relief, and I began grabbing anything within reach, throwing these items and breaking some furniture. When I finally came to my senses and looked around, I saw that my apartment looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. I collapsed onto the bed, wanting to disappear myself. But a few minutes later, when I was lying there was a knock at the door. Just wondering who the hell it was. I went to open the door. When I did, Becky stood before me. She looked at me with a pitiful and regretful expression, but I still didn't want to see her and tried to slam the door in her face. "Wait, David? Please," she managed to cry out before the door closed. "What do you want from me? Go to your husband. Why did you come back into my life again, David? I'll explain everything. Let me in, please." Although I didn't want to see or hear from her again, I reluctantly opened the door again, and she cautiously entered, taking in the chaos I had created and stepping over the debris. Becky made her way to the armchair and sat down. I closed the door, followed her, and sat opposite her. "Why the hell did you come?" I demanded. David, please, just hear me out. You love too quickly. You just overreacted. Overreacted. I interrupted her. You were sitting there hugging that. Why did you tell me you loved me if you were still with him? You're a lying whore. Did you just want to play with me? No, David. It broke up. Oh, so that's what you call it now. How dare you? We just hugged one last time as a goodbye. Yes, you won't even let me explain. Yes, I saw him and we talked. He even agreed to sign the divorce papers. Believe me, David, I'm not seeing him. I told you I love you and I don't need him. I'm just glad he finally let me go. Is that true? I asked, bewildered by this unexpected turn of events. Yes, David. Now we can be together. Just you and me, well, and I understood what she was hinting at, but I still couldn't believe it. Are you saying that? I asked slowly. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a child. It's yours, no doubt, but it's only been a week. And very lucky. I must have gotten pregnant the first day. It happens? Don't you believe it? Oh my God. That's wonderful. I exclaimed. All my anger dissipated as the news she shared filled me with joy and restored my faith in something good. I had completely forgotten that I had just been angry with her. I hugged her as gently as possible, realizing that there was already a tiny human being inside her. That evening ended happily for both of us. We reconciled, and this time it was final. Her husband Simon no longer bothered us, and Becky no longer needed to hide from him. I informed my brother that my life had regained its meaning, and he was happy for me. Soon, we legalized our relationship, celebrating it in a narrow family circle. We decided not to spend extravagantly on a lavish wedding and instead invested in a nice home, knowing that our family would soon grow. 9 years have passed. But during all this time, I never regretted opening the door instead of slamming it in her face and letting happiness back into my life. We had a son, and 2 years later, a daughter. As they grew up, Becky started working as a primary school teacher in the same school where we enrolled our children. I continued to work for the same company, working harder to secure promotions, as I now had to provide for more than just myself. I was pleased with all the positive changes that had occurred in my life since then. Jason Mel had lost his job after the hurricane in our hometown, and he didn't want to be a real estate developer, and he didn't really understand construction. Restored with my approval, he sold our house and moved to the city where I lived. Using the money from the house sale, he bought a small apartment and I helped him find work. He often visited us, showering my children with small gifts and treats. In general, life had settled down, and I was grateful for how things had turned out, especially since moving to another city had propelled both my work and family life in a positive direction. This was how it was until recently. A few days ago, I accidentally found out that a new janitor had been hired at the school where my wife worked and where my children attended. It might not sound like a big deal, but the janitor turned out to be Simon. Becky's ex-husband. I had first heard about him when my son Dylan came to me one evening, sharing that the new janitor often watched him, making him somewhat uncomfortable. When he mentioned the janitor's name, I began to suspect who it might be, although I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that it was the same man I had in mind. The next day, I took a day off from work and went to the school without informing my wife. Oops there. I quickly found Simon in the schoolyard, where he spent his breaks. When I saw him, I was convinced it was him. But sure, over the years, he had changed a bit, having lost a lot of weight and grown a scruffy beard, but it was undoubtedly him. His eyes from that moment, when I first saw him, were forever etched in my memory. He had bright, deeply set blue eyes with thick black eyelashes that were unforgettable. And now with him re-entering our lives, I wanted to pluck those eyes out and throw them into his trash can. Faye, you... I approached him. He didn't notice me immediately, but when I called out to him, he turned around. "What do you want?" he asked in the same tone he had used 9 years ago. "I've come to talk. Tell me, why are you here? Why did you come back? Why are you stalking my son?" "I don't understand what you're talking about," he replied with confusion. "Don't pretend you don't understand. You know perfectly well. You promised to leave Becky and never bother her again. So why did you come back?" "I just got a job here." "There's nothing wrong with that." "Oh, really? Out of all the cities and all the schools, you chose this city and this school. Why are you stalking us?" "Becky is happy. We have kids. Simon, you'd better leave." "Why should I? I haven't done anything wrong. Why should I leave?" "Listen here." I stepped closer to him and wanted to grab his collar, but a voice from behind stopped me. "What's going on here?" I heard and turned around. And behind me stood a young man with a well-built physique, staring at us intently, evidently noticing the aggression from my side. "And who the hell are you?" I asked. "I work here. Drake Forrest, the PHWA US Ed teacher." "Can I help with something?" "No," I replied. "I just came to talk to an old acquaintance." Mr. Cast, are you okay?" the PH1T's Mixed Ed teacher asked Simon. He nodded in response. The phys ed teacher watched us for a few more seconds and then walked away, but he didn't leave the area entirely. He continued to roam the courtyard, setting up equipment for an upcoming class. "Simon, I'm asking you, please leave us alone. I don't want Becky to be worried again, let alone my kids. Do you really not care that you once loved her? Please, for that reason, leave her and us in peace." However, Simon continued to cynically gaze at me, and I even noticed a smirk on his face. At that moment, I desperately wanted to punch that smirk off his face so that he would forget the way here forever. But I restrained myself, hoping for a favorable outcome. Just then the bell rang and the children spilled out into the courtyard from the school doors, leaving Simon on the bench. I wanted to find Becky and talk to her about this. However, when I reached her classroom, I was told that she was in a meeting with the principal and would be there for an unknown amount of time. I had to return to work as well since a colleague had called, saying that clients were coming over for a presentation. I left, but in the evening, I planned to have a conversation with my wife and ask why she hadn't told me that her ex-husband was back in town. The workday felt incredibly long, as if time were intentionally dragging itself out until the impending discussion. But when it finally came to an end, I rushed home, mentally rehearsing the upcoming conversation in my head. When I entered the house, the kids were playing together in the living room, and Becky was cooking something at the stove. I approached the children as usual, asked how they were doing in school, and requested that they go play in their rooms or outside. They didn't understand why I asked them to do that, but they complied and soon left the room. I entered the kitchen and sat down at the table. "Becky, we need to talk seriously." "Yes." "What's happened?" "It's about Simon." "Why didn't you tell me that he got a job at your school?" "Damn," she muttered, stopping stirring the pot and turning to me. "David, I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how. And what difference would it make? He doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Don't lie to me." "I believed you. I trusted you then, and I believed you all this time. And you kept his presence a secret from me. Do you know he's stalking Dylan? What if he's turned into a pedophile? My son is scared to walk past him." "What are you talking about? He would never harm a child. He's changed." "I don't understand. How can you be so sure? You told me back then that he was a rough pervert. When did you find out about him again? Did you meet him?" I was already shouting, and I didn't realize that my anger was spiraling out of control. But when I saw that Becky was looking at me fearfully, I understood that I was going too far and tried to calm myself down. "Becky, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I just want to know what he's doing in our town." Becky sat down at the table and sighed sadly. She explained that he had just started working at their school recently, and she was surprised by his appearance there. During a break, she'd approached him to talk and find out what was going on, and he had told her the same story he told me, but he came to look for a job because he had lost everything, his home and his job. Since he had a friend living in the same town, he had asked to stay with him, but in order to afford to eat, he needed a job, and the first opportunity he found was the janitor position at the school, and it's close to where Lit. "But why are you so sure that he has changed and become better?" "I told you that, Dylan." Becky interrupted me. "But don't worry. I talked to Simon, and he'll try to avoid him. Like I said, it's all in the past. David, you don't need to worry about him. Trust me." "I trust you." "Becky, I'm just worried. He once shattered your life. Becky and I reconciled. I trusted her, and I hoped that Simon would indeed disappear from our lives soon. But the next day, I noticed that my son came home again in a gloomy mood. I called him and asked what was wrong, promising that it would be our secret. Dylan didn't immediately confess, but eventually he told me something dreadful. He admitted that he saw the janitor bothering Mom at school, and when he confronted him, the janitor threatened him, saying not to tell anyone, or else something bad would happen to his dad and a little sister. Upon hearing those words, I felt a surge of anger building up inside me, as powerful as the tornado that had once destroyed my city, if not more so. But I tried not to show it to my son. Becky had gone to the store at that time, so I asked our neighbor to watch the kids. Then, I hurried to the school to find that bastard. If unfortunately, he was still there but preparing to leave, and I located him in a storage room. You piece of garbage. How dare you approach my family? I charged at him, landing a punch with all my might. Simon stumbled backward from the blow, knocking over a bucket of cleaning supplies but managing to stay on his feet. He quickly turned to face me, ready to defend himself, but he also decided not to stay silent. To your family. Are you sure they're your family? He said with that same mocking smile. Are you an arsehole? Yes, this is my family. Bastard, how dare you threaten my son? I hit him again with all my might. But didn't Becky tell you that's not your son? He hissed, wiping the blood off his chin. What? I even lowered my hand. I was shocked by his words, feeling completely disoriented. Had Becky lied to me? But why? Or was Simon just trying to mess with my head? At that moment, I had an overwhelming desire to obliterate him. Well, I stood there for a moment, trying to process the information. Simon seized the opportunity and struck me, causing me to stumble and fall. His blow brought me back from my thoughts. Despite feeling pain throughout my body from the fall, I quickly got up, grabbed him, and wrestled him to the ground. I managed to get a hold of his neck and began choking him. At that moment, I heard stomping behind me, but I didn't care. I was so angry with the bastard that it seemed no one could stop me from finishing him off. However, a loud voice from behind did make me pause. What's going on here? I'll call the police right now. There was no way I wanted to talk to the police right now, especially since I'd been caught assaulting their employee. I turned around and saw the gym teacher behind me, and as much as I didn't want to, I had to let the bastard go. And especially since the headmaster had also appeared near us, but I was even a little glad to see him. What's happening here? And the principal asked. Became just in time, I said, adjusting my jacket. Do you know who you've hired here? This scumbag was bothering my wife and threatening my children. What if he's some kind of pedophile? Did you even check his background? Is that true? The principal asked, looking at Simon. Oh, he's just sick or something? He didn't like something, and he decided to take it out on me. I'm just doing my cleaning here, Simon feigned innocence. You bastard. I wanted to lunge at him again, but the physical education teacher restrained me, and Simon got lucky this time. The principal asked me to go with him to his office and have a talk. He also asked the physical education teacher to hold Simon for a while and said that he'd speak with him later. It seemed that the principal and the teacher wanted to avoid involving the police if possible. I sat down in the principal's office, feeling like a student in trouble again, but I needed to clarify things with him. I explained everything I knew and what my son had told me, emphasizing that I didn't want Dylan to be dragged into this further, as he was still a frightened child. The principal took note of my concerns and promised to take appropriate measures, including investigating Simon. If he posed a real threat, the principal assured me that Simon would be terminated. I left the school feeling somewhat relieved that the situation was being addressed, even though I was furious with Simon. As I walked through the hallway past the office door, I saw Simon sitting on a bench, waiting his turn to be questioned, with the physical education teacher guarding him. I glared at Simon with intense hatred, and he returned the gaze as if telling me that this wasn't over. Leaving the school behind, accountantly, I hurried home. I intended to have a serious conversation with Becky. I could feel my emotions swirling, and I knew that this wouldn't be an easy talk. I needed to understand why she had lied to me and had been keeping secrets for so many years. Or maybe she was innocent, and Simon had made up the story about my son to manipulate me. But why would he do that? What did he want from me? When I arrived home, I noticed that Becky was already there, engaged in a conversation with our neighbor, whom I had asked to watch the kids. I tried not to let my emotions show too much, even though they were running high. Seeing the children playing in the house, I realized that it wouldn't be appropriate to have this conversation in their presence. I asked our neighbor to take the kids to her house for a while. And she agreed, albeit with a compassionate and warning look at Becky. What happened? Becky asked once we were alone. I glanced out the window, waiting until our neighbor and the kids had gone into her house. Cat for himself. I continued. Becky, Dylan told me he saw something at school, and Simon threatened him. Why didn't you tell me about this? We saw each other after you came back. What does he want from you? What do you mean he threatened him? David, he just approached me to talk. I have no idea what you're talking about. Stop lying to me. I grabbed her and pressed her against the wall. Simon told me that Dylan isn't my son. Tell me why he said that. David, what are you doing? He's just lying. Can't you see that? Then why? Why? He wouldn't have said that just for no reason. Tell me the truth, or I can't guarantee what I'll do. I swear if you lied to me. I raised my hand threateningly. But you know perfectly well I can do DNA testing, so tell me the truth. Becky shrank back in fear, realizing that she had no way out. Tears welled up in her eyes. David, please forgive me. But you have to know that I've loved you ever since you asked me out on our first date at the cafe. I was just afraid to tell you. David? I understood that Dylan wasn't my biological son. But how could this be? Why didn't she just tell me when she came back to me? I would have accepted her and him regardless. But instead, she had lied to me and tried to pass off someone else's child as mine. I couldn't comprehend it. My anger made me want to hit her with such force that she swallowed her lying tongue. Despite the overwhelming anger I felt, I couldn't bring myself to strike the woman I had loved for all these years and who had given me a daughter. However, the adrenaline was coursing through me, and I impulsively punched the wall next to her face. The impact left a dent in the wall, and the knuckles on my hand started to bleed. Becky was terrified and trembling in front of me. She continued to apologize, swearing that it was the only thing she had kept from me because she was afraid I'd reject her. She insisted that she loved me deeply and wanted to be with me. "Is Mandy at least my daughter?" they asked. "Yes, David." "Don't doubt that. Even if you go through with that damn DNA test, she's your daughter. Please forgive me. I didn't know what to do in that moment, and it seemed like a simple lie in her favor, but I still couldn't accept it. I knew I wouldn't be able to look at Dylan the same way anymore, knowing that he wasn't my biological child, even though he was innocent in all of this. After releasing my wife, I went to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle. I felt the urge to drink away my problems. However, the thought of Dylan still consumed me, and I stood there in front of the fridge with the bottle in hand for a while. Eventually, I decided to put the bottle back, realizing that alcohol wouldn't solve anything. I called my brother and asked to meet him. When I met my brother in the park as we had agreed, I poured out everything to him. He listened attentively and gave me a sympathetic look. I knew he probably couldn't provide a straightforward solution, but he was the closest person to me in this city, and I just needed to vent. "So what do I do now?" "I don't know, brother. But if you love her so much, maybe you should just listen to your heart." "What's it telling you?" "I don't know what I would do in a situation like this, but they're your family, and it's up to you to decide if you still want your family." His words held some wisdom. After all, before Simon entered the picture, I had loved them all deeply. I continued to love them, but the hurt from Becky's deception was still fresh. I decided to give it some time, hoping that my pain would subside and that our relationship could return to the way it was. Dylan considered me his father, and I had always considered him my son. As I returned home, the kids were already back from the neighbor's house. Becky was playing with them in the living room, but her eyes carried a deep sadness. I didn't say anything to her. Instead, I called the children over and hugged them tightly. When Dylan called me, "Dad," once again, I realized that I couldn't push away the child I had raised and loved for all those years. While my hurt and anger remained, I couldn't abandon this little miracle whom I had nurtured with love and care. As I hugged the kids, exhortations to erasers, I noticed Becky looking at me, hopefully and trying to squeeze out a smile, but I hadn't forgiven her yet. I needed time to forgive her deception. The following day, at Sixers, I went to work as usual, but I couldn't stop thinking about the situation at the school. I wondered if Simon was still employed there and how the children were doing. Several times, he considered calling the school to find out, but each time something interrupted me, a colleague with work-related questions or my boss calling me in for a meeting, and the call went out of my head. Then for a while, and at the end of the workday, I still decided to go straight there and find out everything in person, especially realizing that Becky was no longer at work. That's when I was driving up to the school and stopped at the pedestrian crossing, where a few students were crossing the road. I was startled when someone tapped on the window next to me. He was giving me a crazed look and then asked me to roll down the window. "What do you want?" I asked after complying with his request. "Do you believe me now? Did you find out the whole truth? Do you know that I got fired because of you?" he said. "What do I care about you? You've barged back into my life and tried to ruin it again. What else do you want? Do you want charity?" I replied, "No, do you think I'll just let you take everything away from me? You took my wife from me back then, and now, thanks to you, I'm out of a job. Damn it, you're annoying. Get out of here." Becky made her own choice. "At the policies," I said as I pressed the gas pedal to continue driving, but Simon shouted something that made me stop again. "Do you know who she's dating now? Did she tell you about that choice?" I couldn't take it anymore and got out of the car. That's grabbing him by the collar. I pinned him against the car. I noticed that Simon reeked of alcohol, and he thought his words were just drunken nonsense this time. I don't even feel like hitting him anymore. "Say it again, you jerk," I demanded. "Oh, you don't know. Your dear Becky is with the gym teacher now. Soon, the whole school will know about it. I'll make sure of that," he sneered again. My anger surged once more, but I refrained from hitting him. Simon fell onto the road, but I didn't waste any more energy on him. I now had a new goal to uncover the truth. I got back in my car and drove to the school. There I asked around for the gym teacher's whereabouts and went to find him. There was no point asking Simon anymore. I had heard enough. But as for the PE teacher, except that when I went to confront him, I was well aware that he was clearly physically superior to me, and I needed to act differently. When I found him, he was working out in the gym, and it seemed like he was using a machine to maintain his physical shape. I call you people fashions. I stood in the doorway until he noticed me, and when he did, he stopped exercising and addressed me. "What can I help you with?" he asked. I came to talk. I answered him, and I thought what a bastard he was for pretending not to know. "I'm listening carefully," he said, sitting up as I approached him. "Is there something wrong with your child?" "No. There's nothing wrong with my children. I'm here to talk about my wife." "Oh, you're the guy who had a run-in with the janitor yesterday, right?" "Well, congratulations. The principal kicked him out." "But you didn't have to hit him. He's half your size," the gym teacher said. "Did you fight him too? How would you know his strength?" "But I didn't come to talk about him. I heard a rumor that you're sleeping with my wife." "Is that true?" I asked, closely observing his behavior to determine if he was telling the truth. "Haha, what are you talking about? Who told you that?" That idiot, the gym teacher fumbled, not knowing what to do with his hands, so he grabbed a towel and started wiping his neck. "Why did you immediately think of him?" "Because he saw you two together." I decided to bluff a bit to get him to confess. "What did he see, even if he did?" And even if something happened, what are you going to do about it? Beat me up too? Go ahead, try it. By the way, she's like a tornado in bed. Where did you find her? He laughed. I realized that Simon, despite being a jerk, had told me the truth about my wife. I was even grateful that he showed up at the school, as I probably wouldn't have found out about her affair with the gym teacher otherwise. If I hadn't been married to her, Achim season Spersolfalin as a dissity, and might have understood why she went for him. He was quite good-looking in addition to his muscular physique. The gym teacher didn't seem to have any intention to continue talking to me and went back to the gym, lifting heavy weights. Meanwhile, I was tearing myself apart from the inside out from the desire to get even with him. And while he was mocking me for being physically weaker than him, he didn't notice that I'd pulled out the retainer, and when he lifted the weight again, the cord snapped and the barbell and weights, and came down hard on his neck. There was a crunch and a pitiful last scream from the cocky jock. I looked at his blue face for a few more seconds, and then I left the gym and called for help, shouting that the teacher had had an accident, even though I realized that no one could help him. A quickly conscience and a good feeling of revenge. I drove home. Becky was waiting for me there, cooking my favorite dish, hoping it would help me forgive her. But what she didn't know was that I already knew about her affair with the gym teacher. "Will go away," I told her as I entered the kitchen, and her smile instantly changed to one of surprise. "What? You're still asking? He told me you loved me, and at the same time you were involved with the gym teacher." I shouted, and I didn't care if the kids heard me. Becky realized she would never get my forgiveness again. After a while, she packed her things and moved to the town where we met. She still had a lonely house there, and later she signed the divorce papers I sent her. I didn't even want to see her. I kept both kids. I wouldn't let her see them, at least not yet. And I told them that my mom was away on a long business trip, and I didn't know when she would be back. And only mentally, I prayed that a tornado would come through that town again, and that this time it would take Becky with it forever, because her despicable deeds had blown through my life like a hurricane winds that had destroyed our relationship. If you enjoyed this story, please like and leave a comment. It's important for us and will help promote this video. Thank you for watching us.